Hello and welcome to Ildefonso Inc. Today we are talking with Dee Hart about managing a music catalog. And Dee is an artist manager and the owner of the Los Angeles-based Hart Songs. Hart Songs specializes in artist management and master/publishing rights registration. She has 10 years of experience working with independent artists. Her focus is on helping artists and creators understand the complicated aspects of the music industry. So think like publishing and metadata and performing rights organizations. So today we'll be diving into the importance of understanding terms like composition, sound recording, music rights management, and it was a really great interview, and I really hope that you guys enjoy it. If you've always wondered if there were specialists out there who understood the components of the industry that could be really, really confusing, then Dee Hart is one of those specialists. So if you're a songwriter or a publisher or a label or somehow related to the music industry, then I highly suggest you tune into this episode. So thank you so much for clicking on the video and let us know what you think of the interview. Hello, welcome, Dee Hart. I've known about you for a while, but I'm so glad we can finally sit down and talk. And this conversation is going to be focused, obviously, on managing a music catalog, but you also do so many other things. So we're just going to kind of have an organic conversation. We have an outline. Mm-hmm. I know that there's going to be a ton of stuff that I want to get your take on. You've been in the industry now for how many years would you say you've been like operating in the industry?
I would say about a decade. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I think we're probably about the same age. I'd assume we probably graduated similar years. And
possibly, yeah.
You worked, tell us real quick, just kind of like summary of your resume, because even in the pre-convo, you mentioned one that I wasn't aware of. So tell us who you've worked for.
Yeah.
That way we could get a full grasp.
Definitely. Throughout my entire, working career, I've had many, many jobs, so many before I even started working in the music industry. One summer in between a college, spring and fall, I worked at a digital design company where I made little memes on Photoshop for my full-time job. So between random jobs like that and then having my first internship and job in the music industry my junior year of college, that was a label rights consulting company for label services for indie artists that decide that they aren't going to be with a label, but they still need a team on board. They also had a publishing admin arm. So that was my first introductory job in the music industry. I started as an intern, and then after I did my internship with them, they hired me. So I went from being an intern to graduating with a job in the music industry, which was really exciting. And that was a very small niche company. Funny enough, I don't speak Spanish, but a big part of our clientele was Spanish speaking artists.
Wait, what is their name? Because I feel like I know them.
So it was Adarga Entertainment Group.
Yes, I think I know someone who worked there.
Possibly,
Vianney.
yeah.
Did you ever meet
Yes.
Vianney Escobar?
Yes.
Okay, wow.
Yes,
Small
I went
world.
to school with Vianney.
No way.
We both studied music business. The
Wow.
world's really small.
Yeah.
I think she was an intern and an assistant when I was still there, and then I left and she continued to work there. So that was my first job. I was there for almost 5 years, which is kind of crazy to think about now because a lot of my peers in the industry don't really stay anywhere longer than 2 or 3 years, because I feel that's when you're in the growing stages of your career, that's when you kind of hit your maximum capacity at a job in order for you to switch to that next job and get better pay. But yeah, after Adarga, I went to ADRev, which was our YouTube rights management company that we worked directly with for Adarga. So it was kind of an easy skip over to a new company that already knew about me. There wasn't even a job position. I was just telling them I was looking for my next thing, and they were like, okay, we'll hire you. Like, we don't have a job, but like, we'll hire you as the publishing manager to manage our catalog and the publishing assets for our clients in the back end of the YouTube CMS. And that was cool because I was very interested in just how much royalties are paid out via through YouTube. It's just like such an unknown, like behind the scenes kind of part of the industry. So I worked there for 2 years. And during my time there is when I started to consult for independent artists. I spent a lot of time on the app Clubhouse. So this was the beginning stages of the pandemic where we were all at home and social audio apps popped up. I would hang out in a lot of music business rooms and kind of just chat with independent artists and creators, just about like questions in the industry, advice, just who should I distribute my music through, like all of that kind of stuff. And so I slowly started building up like client base of just indie artists that I would consult for a very, very minimal amount of money per month, where I would just hop on the call with them every week and kind of talk out strategy for their career, whether they're trying to figure out how to release their first single or they've been releasing for a little while. They want to, vamp up their like social media, campaigns and stuff. So I was doing that on the side of my full-time job in the pandemic because we had like a lot of extra time. We were like sitting at home, just kind of hanging out. And so I was like, okay, I'll just I'll grow my side hustle. Which is funny because that kind of led me into my next job at Soundcloud as an account manager for their distribution division. I realized that ADRev was really great and it built a lot of my technical skills as far as like music publishing, rights management, understanding splits in the different publishers that are out there. But I was like, I want to work more hands-on with artists. Like that's really what I love. And it just feels more personable to me rather than like staring at Excel sheets all day. So I got that job as an account manager for SoundCloud's distribution division, which used to be called Repost. And they bought Repost and it was Repost by SoundCloud. And now it's just SoundCloud for artists. So if you were like a SoundCloud artist, there's like a button that says, do you want to distribute this song to all the stores? So I was an account manager, which basically means like I was the day-to-day person for about 330 artists and label accounts underneath their distribution platform, to help with things as far as like metadata changes. The release didn't go up on this platform. I need to edit my TikTok preview time, like for the song. I want the track to start at like 35 seconds rather than at second 0. And then also just like marketing strategy, DSP best practices, just working with all different types of indie artists, all genres, artists that didn't have managers, artists that had full teams and budget. So yeah, and then during that, I continued to pick up clients on the side for my publishing admin business, where I kind of just audit catalogs and make sure songs are registered, and then was managing a couple artists. And so it kind of, Hart Songs already existed before it really officially existed, which I think I highly recommend for people. It's really nice to have the security of the day job and the full-time salary of like health benefits and stuff to kind of try out. Like, I feel like so many times people's side hustles turn into their main thing. And that's kind of what happened with me. So last year in March is when I like launched Hart Songs. And then around 2 months later is when I got laid off in the second round of layoffs at SoundCloud because, it's a music tech company. The past 2 years have been really rough for me and a lot of friends that have worked at these companies that, they thought they had job security. They have a really good salary and all of these fun benefits. But unfortunately, the job crisis and stocks, the way that companies decide like if they're profitable or not, you're kind of not in the place of power. You're like, I am powerless. This is not, this is my job, but it may not be my job tomorrow. So it kind of forced me into doing Hart Songs full time. But I'm really happy that it did. Because I feel like I've done more in like a year than I have maybe in the past 5 years of my career. It's just been a lot of change, a lot of growth, and a lot of meeting new people and like having cool opportunities come my way.
Yeah. And so it sounds like then you've been able to kind of combine your corporate experience on the music side with kind of the entrepreneurial side. And that experience, I think, is invaluable because, yeah, you were on those teams that I'm sure you're still working with, and you're still able to utilize that knowledge
Yeah.
that so many of us on the outside looking in are always trying to get a better understanding of, all of these different platforms, all these tech tools. And so, yeah, you've kind of found a niche in a way of combining publishing admin knowledge with like artist relations with the tech interfaces,
Yeah.
and you mentioned YouTube CMS, right? Is that what it's called? YouTube CMS, ADRev, Repost, which is now SoundCloud for artists, and all these different tools. And I'm sure there are so many more that we'll get into and at least mention. So let's maybe start with the songwriter and publisher relationship. So for those who are trying to get a better grasp, I kind of like for every specialist from the different angles of the industry to re-explain songwriting math, because it's different. It's prioritized differently depending on the side of the industry you come from, right? So like I have my formula of explaining it for sync fees, but I'd be really curious to hear your go-to. So music industry math behind the publisher share, the writer share, and the label share of a song. What's your go-to analogy for breaking down the way, is a song 200%? Is a song 100%? What is your go-to?
I mean, I always like to lean towards the 100% because in my mind that just makes more sense, because in the broader aspect of the industry outside of if you happen to be with BMI or ASCAP, it's going to be, a song is 100%, Oftentimes when I do this I have a presentation of rights and royalties that I like to show students and like people who are trying to like understand it. It's good to look at, here is an example BMI registration and here is an example ASCAP registration. At the end of the day, there's two pieces of the pie. It just depends on who you're talking to, whether it adds up to 100 or 200%. But like what we were mentioning, like when you go out in the world of distribution or label or like negotiating how much of the piece of the pie of a song you have, in most cases it's out of 100%. And even if you were talking about like an artist getting like a major label deal, their negotiation is still going to be out of that 100% of the master. And then they're probably going to get, hopefully they're getting more these days, but like the typical like really rough one is like an 18% artist net earnings of their like a royalty on their own songs. So yeah, I mean, I like to put it out of 100%, but it really depends. With every single one of my clients, depending on what their background is, I sometimes have different ways to like walk it through. I mean, the typical thing is there are 4 writers on a song. Each of them are splitting the song equally, 25, 25, 25%, and half of that percentage is for the writer's portion and half of it's for the publishing portion. It's always very easy to use the example if it's like an even split, but the minute it comes into play where it's like there are 6 writers, 2 of them have co-pub deals, then you're like, okay, this just gets really complicated to explain to anybody, but yeah.
Yeah. So what about when it comes to, say you're in a writing session and you don't have a publishing entity and your co-writer is signed to a major publisher and they come to you and they say, hey, should I register this song to BMI directly? Should I use a tool like Songtrust? Is there something else that I should do to register this song? Do I let the publisher register the song for me? What would be the best practice for someone who hasn't set this stuff up but wants to make sure that now they're working in the industry, this is their first major co-write, and now there is a major publisher attached to one of their works via a co-writing session that they happen to do?
Definitely. I would first recommend, obviously, picking whatever PRO you want, and registering with them. And whether or not you're on BMI and you're just going to collect your publishing share through your writer account, or you're going to have both a writer and a publishing entity. I think people get really confused by like, I don't have a publisher, but it's like, you can be your own like per se publisher. You just have to like create an entity on the PRO that you're with in order to collect publishing. I always say do not depend on others to register things correctly, especially if you have a publishing administrator or somebody who needs to go out and collect those mechanical royalties for you. You need to register your entire catalog with them in order to ensure that you're getting all the royalties. Because if you just get added to it through your BMI IPI, for example, there are still other royalties that you are owed that you need to go collect for. And I mean, I think that's why often I do recommend like a publishing admin to come in and help you, because an independent artist that doesn't really know the landscape of royalties is like, there's a lot of organizations that you would have to directly register with. If you didn't have a publishing administrator come in and collect that take a 15% cut, but to do all like the legwork. So that's when you'd recommend like the Song Trust, Cobalt, Centric music companies of the world, where they help you collect the publishing admin side of things.
Yeah. So then say if someone finds that they're at that particular point where they're thinking, okay, I should now get a publishing admin service, should they then bulk upload the back end straight to that? Or is there still a value to putting your song on BMI? So say now that writer now has one of those three. Were you saying that now that songwriting publishing admin team is going to register with BMI, or is it still on songwriters to like do their initial upload to
definitely.
BMI or
So
ASCAP?
let's say you're not with a publishing admin company yet. It doesn't hurt to first register it yourself, collect the full amount of writing and publishing on the BMI side of things. And then if you do have a publishing administrator, you'd send that information to them. And then they actually come in and they do the back end kind of stuff where they put themselves as the administrator for your publishing portion. Then there are also many cases where, let's say it's a writer who in the next 2 years, they're looking at signing a pub deal. So either like a traditional pub deal, co-pub, or like a more official admin deal where they're like maybe get it in advance. There might be reason for them to not go out and collect some of those extra side royalties, although I'm always an advocate of making sure that you're collecting all of them. So that company that pays out the mechanical royalties is the MLC. And there are some other like direct companies you can go to. So it really depends too on the journey of that writer and artist, because for like an artist writer that's out here that's like making cuts and like getting cuts on big songs, and they're thinking that they're going to be like in talks to publishers, there are like some instances where I would say like just make sure it's registered with the PRO side. And if you think there's a conversation that's about to happen with a publisher, then maybe you can hold off and not go to a publishing admin company that locks you into a 1 or 2 year deal to take a percentage of your earnings. But that's really specific and is like something that like if an artist or a writer has a team, even if they don't have a manager, if they have a lawyer, it's good to like have that conversation and talk that out. Because I mean, I interact with many writers here in LA that they're already getting put in sessions with some of these big publishers and they're thinking that they're going to get an offer soon. So it's kind of just like weighing out where each writer is in their career, because I have like kind of mentored a writer who recently got signed, who had a huge cut on like a gigantic K-pop song. And she obviously didn't have anybody helping her register things. And when the publisher signed her, they actually found out that someone was collecting her portion of the mechanical royalties, which is like when it comes to like a viral K-pop song where it's like 40 to 60 million streams on Spotify alone, like that's not a small chunk of money that could have potentially been stolen from her. I haven't got the follow-up on how they figured that out or like how they hopefully claimed her royalties that were owed to her. But I think that's the scary thing. So it's like if there's traction and there's stuff going on, you definitely want to be there to collect your portion of the money. Otherwise, like people will collect it.
Yeah, I'm always reminding artists that it's a tech environment. Like so much of this comes down to your understanding of the pipelines, right?
Yeah.
You know, what is your philosophy as the artist? Like, what is your philosophy when your music hits YouTube? What is your philosophy when your music hits, you know, TikTok and Instagram? What is your, you know, who's clearing the sync if it gets released onto YouTube as, you know, embedded ad video? You know, there's so much of this kind of side of the industry that a lot of artists, I think, I notice the focus is a lot on Spotify numbers. It's like we need to, you know, do everything we can to drive the numbers to Spotify, but there's so many other components that come into play that might make a really big difference and could be directly related to that Spotify royalty, like you mentioned with the K-pop co-writer. Or sometimes it's stuff where, yes, someone else uploaded your song to YouTube and it has a lot more, maybe it has more streams on YouTube than it does on Spotify right now. And you're not collecting that, or you don't have a philosophy on how to collect, because there's different ways that you could approach that from a monetization perspective, from a content rights management. So maybe let's just kind of talk about the management side. So when you're managing an artist, what are some of the key takeaways that you think artists should be aware of when they're entering the new music landscape that we're currently in? Like, what's kind of a top 3, top 5 issue that you think artists need to be aware of, whether it's the tech or the social media or the distribution or the traditional kind of publishing deals? What are your kind of, hey, this is our first meeting. Before you do anything, I want you to know about these factors of the industry today.
Yeah. I mean, I think like you said is at the core, they need to fundamentally understand what a master sound recording royalty split, or like understand what they have, if they have anything of that, and then the difference between that and like composition and publishing. Because if you don't understand that, you, one, can't negotiate for yourself or advocate for yourself in any setting at all, because you don't understand the difference between like what is the sound recording royalties and what does that mean, and who are the companies that are typically involved with that. That's like the distributor, that's the distro kid. When you get added to split pay, that's a part of the master sound recording that's unrelated to composition and publishing. I've had a bunch of conversations with artists where they're like, oh, the composition split and the publishing split is the same thing as the master, like we're just doing it the same. And I'm like, how? We need to talk about that. That doesn't make any sense. Like, somebody paid for the song to be out there. Also, like, wait, what? Like, there's just so many instances where like artists and writers like don't get the difference of those two. So it's actually quite literally just the education of understanding what rights are out there in play and what you may or may not have the right to, or like what could you ask for more of. I think that's a huge thing. I mean, I think producers have it really tough because they sometimes work for free and quite possibly never get paid for a song that they've produced because the song never gets released, or the song gets released but it's like an indie artist that hasn't really made any money, but they get 50% of the track, but like 50% of no earnings is nothing. So understanding like what how to advocate for yourself, what are the different rights and royalties. So then you can better understand like what you're going to get at the end of the day. Because I think that's something that's completely misunderstood all the time.
Right. Yeah. And the most common one that I hear from artists is I'll ask, okay, so who are the, you know, the rights holders in the song? Like, do you co-write the song with someone? Did you have someone produce? And it's always, oh, the producer's a friend. And I'm like, okay, but that doesn't explain who owns the master. Does the producer have a deal memo? Like, have you guys worked out how they get compensated?
Yeah.
I'll be like, no, they're just super chill.
No, that's constantly the case. And you're like, oh my God.
So I recommend for producers and for artists, like, make sure there's some kind of deal memo. You know, whether the producer's getting points or you're paying the producer or the producer co-wrote the songs with you. And a big one too is like, you know, it all depends on the situation. But for me, I always find like that since artists aren't really aware of the master side, sometimes they'll give away publishing maybe to their friend unintentionally.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's a lot more sticky than the master. If you do the points for the producer or pay the producer, you have a lot more you know, options as you grow. But if once someone has your publishing, I kind of use the description of like, you're kind of married to them for life. Like,
right, exactly.
You now co-own intellectual real estate together, and whoever represents them is now representing a portion of your song. So I say like split sheets, deal memos, and sometimes those things I think can be damaging if you go into it, you know, without the right knowledge. Like sometimes it could do damage because maybe you're negotiating something you're not even aware of.
Yeah.
But I do think, you know, once you've started to commercially enter the industry, like finding ways that you can have those organic conversations with your peers, I think is always super helpful, because then it makes the industry side of it much easier. If we're like able to see that everyone agrees on what the split is and all of that, because you may think as an artist, like, okay, I'm going to sign a label deal, or I'm going to get a sync, or I'm going to get, you know, I'm going to take this to vinyl printing. And it's like, well, those people theoretically should be looking at like documentation that you own your music, you know? And so the road forward in a lot of cases requires artists to like have some kind of proof of like the deal, you know, and all of that. So let's kind of talk about then, like, how do you protect your copyright? Is this something that like artists should they register their song for copyright protection? You know, we kind of already touched on what happens if your co-writer signs a publishing deal, but you know, what options do you have if you notice that someone else registered your song in a way that maybe is inaccurate, or the split got messed up? You know, what are some tools that you recommend independent artists get familiar with and have on their radar for situations like this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely oftentimes, even so, like in these publisher cases, the publisher's main priority is to register the song on behalf of their client. So let's say that they never got your IPI information. So like I've come across many times where an artist is like, no, that they registered it. And I'm like, it's not showing up in your account because they didn't register it with your IPI. So your name, your legal name might be on there correctly, but it says no society and it does not have an IPI. So it's never going to get tracked back to you. And I know that like customer service in many cases and like trying to fix things can be a little bit time consuming, but my word of advice is always just register it correctly with all of the IPI on your side. And then what will happen is there will be like a match in the system where like they see, oh, this is the same song, but like one of them is missing some information and here's the new version. But many times you have to contact like your representative, so like BMI or ASCAP, and be like, hey, here's a screenshot of the original registration. you can see that my API isn't listed here or something like that, but I registered it correctly. And so sometimes it takes, I don't even 2 weeks to like a month or 2 months to get it like amended just for one song. But it's worth it. You just have to put some extra work in. And then if you are frustrated and they're not getting back to you, just know that I looked up recently, like BMI membership alone is just like a ton of people. There's just like a lot of people that they're dealing with and a lot of compositions that they're constantly fixing and making changes to. Luckily, I have my like direct contacts at these companies, which works out very well for my clients when there is a problem. But I mean, oftentimes the average person really just has to go through the support systems that are set in place at these different PROs to get it amended. Oftentimes, if there's something wrong with the split itself and any of the other contributors' percentages have to be reduced, the PRO requires them to acknowledge that. So many times that I've been on email threads where there's a change in the splits and we've had to like loop in the management of the other writer or something, because they can't just like go off and like reduce other people's splits without like confirmation that it's legit. I mean, the one thing that is super helpful, going back to the whole idea that there's like a split sheet with like the agreed upon percentages, that is like really great, because if there's any change or adjustment that needs to be had, sending that to the PRO being like, hey, this is what we ended up landing on, makes everyone's job a lot easier, because they just kind of like can look at all the percentages, the IPI, and then like the signatures on the split sheet. So changes like that become a little bit more easy.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. And then, so yeah, we kind of touched on PRO. So collecting beyond your PRO, we touched on Song Trust. Now, what could you tell us about the YouTube content management system? And then how would you describe the difference between that and a company like ADRev?
Yeah. So in the back end of YouTube, which nobody can see unless they have access to, is the CMS, which is basically like a back end search tool of like millions and millions of assets. And assets meaning by like there are sound recording assets, there are composition assets, there are music video assets. Those are like the main three. But basically, those assets are responsible for collecting ad revenue money and paying it out to the rights holders that are owed. So typically there's one owner of like the sound recording in the back end, whether that be a label, a distributor, or somebody who hires a third party company like ADRev or Orpheum or Exploration. Those are just some examples of those companies that represent like production music libraries. Like a production music library can't necessarily have their own back-end YouTube CMS account, so they do have to go through a different avenue to collect it. But distributors also, you can collect for your sound recording if you just enable that Content ID button when you're distributing a track. And the more complicated side of things is the composition side, because any composition asset could have several rights holders on it, depending on how many writers are on there. And one of my main jobs at ADRev was resolving conflicts, because there were just so many. So there were so many songs that were like either being over collected by like 1 or 2%, or even like, 50%, 200%, which basically just means that there's somebody in the back end that's over collecting. So maybe they're double collecting for their writer, or they lost a writer that they no longer represent, but they're still collecting for that share. And when that happens, the composition asset is put in a conflict state, so it's not paying out royalties to any of the contributors, which is like a real problem if you think about it. Like, many times we've seen like huge songs be in conflict for a very long time. Now, whether that's because there's actually a conflict in the splits, or just like poor admin on behalf of one of the publishers or the publisher admin accounts. Basically, there are so many assets in the back end that they try to prioritize them by money. So oftentimes when we were like looking through a queue of like what are the highest conflicts, it's like we were sorting it by daily views. So in the back end of YouTube, I can see what that song by Harry Styles is in daily views. And like if that is in conflict, like that's going to be at the top of my queue because like that is a big song. So unfortunately, there's also just like a back end of YouTube where there's these like songs that aren't performing well enough and are possibly in conflict, which is just like was a very overwhelming part of my job where I was just like, I'm never going to get this to zero. Like there's no world where I get this queue to zero. So it's kind of just like managing what you can, but which is also why it's important to, you know, pick the right company for your music. Because you don't have access to the back end, so you can't control and protect your own copyright in that world. But it's also why it's good to make sure that you're collecting, because oftentimes random bad actors could also upload your music and say, I own 100% of this if you're not collecting for your content ID on YouTube. Because it's kind of like a wild, wild west. I don't like, you think that like there should be documentation when you do these things and like you say that you can collect this, but like there's not like a system in place where it's monitored well.
Yeah. It's kind of, I've been telling artists, because often what will happen is they'll start a project for fun and they'll be like, I don't care if this doesn't make money. I don't care. Yeah. I just want to express myself, get it onto the platforms. But then because they did it, you know, with good motivations, other people connect with it, and then it starts to creep up and get more and more popular. And then suddenly they're like, oh, now I'm really overwhelmed because I don't understand how any of this works. And I feel like I'm not making money off of my music and I'm not collecting and I'm not this. And it's a really quick, like, emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
So, you know, my current advice has been, if you're an artist or a producer or a writer, you know, take your time, but also anticipate that, you know, you're building a business, whether you like it or not, because someone else may claim your royalties and that won't feel good. And so you'll want to protect yourself at a certain level. And sometimes you can't go backwards and fix things in the past. So it's just better to like take it all in, because you're probably going to be here for the long haul. And the industry is wild and there are so many components to it. It's always adapting. It's always changing. And you kind of just have to like anticipate that, because it's confusing, but luckily there are specialists like you who have put so much time and energy into helping artists. And so, are there any final thoughts that you want to send your way to artists and producers and writers in this current climate of the music industry?
One thing that I constantly come up against is, I mean, I get lots of different questions from artists, but so much of the answers are online. Like, I know, like, it's so funny. We've gotten to this age where now information is so accessible, then people don't first think to like literally use TikTok as a search engine, but like there are people out there creating content with the answers to your questions. Like we're now more than ever, there's just like so much information out there. So there are blogs, there are podcasts, there are people who are constantly posting the answers to your questions. So I'm saying like definitely just be resourceful. You know, if it's not me, there are so many companies too, like Songtrust, the MLC, that create free webinars that are just for teaching people for free, like about this stuff, because it is so complicated. I think everybody is trying to educate the world about rights management because we want it to be less messy. We want less conflicts in the back end. We want less people who are like registering random things and doing it incorrectly, because that just makes all of our jobs like harder. So go out there and like seek the answers to your questions because they're out there.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you kind of have to like carve out some time to just like, yeah, watch a podcast, read a PDF, you know, have a conversation with other artists. That's another thing that I've learned is like all of the information we need to know is pooled somewhere between all of us. So just like getting coffee with other artists, getting to know other people, because everyone has their specialty. Like one artist might be blowing up on TikTok, another might be blowing up on Instagram or on Spotify, or someone's getting a ton of syncs and has no social media, you know? So the more that I think artists talk to each other and producers talk to each other and songwriters talk to each other, like there's all these little hacks and tips and tricks that you just kind of pick up on by having conversations. And I think what you said about, just try Googling it, try looking for a social media thing that might explain it. So thank you again so much for talking. I hope we can have you back, because there's so much of this that is really interesting to me that I think would be fun to dive even deeper into. Where can our audience find you and follow along for more information?
Yeah, definitely. Pretty much on all of my social accounts, it's just my full name, Jamie Dee Hart. I try to post frequently on LinkedIn any kind of like educational stuff that I'm trying to make happen. I'm trying to get together possibly like some kind of webinar so I can give my rights and royalty presentation to a wider audience. I think that'd be fun. I just have to do the admin to get there. But yeah, Jamie Dee Hart, like on Instagram. That's probably the best way to stay in touch with me.
Sweet. Well, thank you again so much for doing this and having this conversation with us. I really, really appreciate it. I'm always talking to artists about these types of questions. So, and I have them too myself. So I really, really appreciate this conversation. So, thank you all for watching, and we will see you guys next time. Later. Bye.